The judge's gavel came down with a sharp crack. Everyone in the courtroom fell silent. Judge William Parker looked down at the woman standing before him. His pale face showed no emotion. "Ms. Diana Thompson, I find you in contempt of court," he said in a cold voice. "You have failed to appear as a witness 3 times now. This court cannot function when people ignore their duty." Diana stood straight, her dark skin glowing under the harsh courtroom lights. Her eyes never left the judge's face. "Your Honor, if I could just explain why That's quite enough," Judge Parker cut her off. "You've had 3 chances to explain yourself. The fine is £5,000, due by the end of the month." The spectators in the courtroom whispered. Some people looked at Diana with pity, others with judgment. But Diana herself didn't show any reaction. She simply gathered her papers and tucked them into her expensive leather bag. As she turned to leave, Judge Parker noticed something odd. Several lawyers nodded to her with respect. Her suit was perfectly tailored, her shoes expensive. She carried herself like someone important, not like a person who would simply ignore court orders. "Next case," the judge called, but his eyes followed Diana as she walked down the aisle and out the double doors. Later that afternoon, Judge Parker sat in his office reviewing cases. His assistant, Robert, knocked on the door. "Sir, there's something you should see," Robert said, placing a newspaper on the desk. "About that woman from this morning." The judge glanced at the paper. There was a small article about a special task force fighting organized crime. In the photo, partly hidden behind other officers, was Diana Thompson. That evening, Diana sat alone in her flat, staring at her phone. The screen showed a text message. "Boss wants to know why you need money suddenly. Meeting tomorrow." She sighed and put the phone down. 2 years of undercover work was now at risk because of a judge who didn't know the whole story. Her team had infiltrated one of the biggest crime families in London. They were close to gathering enough evidence to make arrests that would save countless lives. Diana walked to the window and looked out at the rainy London streets. She couldn't blame Judge Parker. He was just doing his job with the information he had. But now she was in danger. The crime family she was investigating would be suspicious about this sudden fine. They might already be checking her background. Her phone rang. It was her boss, Detective Michael Brown. "They're asking questions about the money," she told him. "This could blow everything." "We're working on it," Michael said. "Try to stay calm. Maybe we can get the judge to help us." Diana laughed without humor. "The judge?" He looked at me like I was nothing but trouble. "People can surprise you," Michael said. "We're sending someone to talk to him tomorrow." After hanging up, Diana made herself a cup of tea. Her hands shook slightly as she poured the hot water. She wasn't afraid for herself, but for the victims of the crime family. Young women brought into the country under false promises, now trapped in terrible conditions. "Too much work," she whispered to herself. "Too many people counting on me." Meanwhile, across town, Judge Parker was having dinner alone in his large, empty house. Something about the woman in his courtroom today kept bothering him. He had been a judge for 15 years and prided himself on reading people well. Diana Thompson hadn't seemed like someone who would disrespect the court without good reason. He picked up the newspaper again and studied the photo more carefully. It was definitely her, though the article didn't mention her by name. What exactly was she involved in? And what had he done today? As he went to bed that night, Judge Parker felt uneasy. Tomorrow he would make some calls, try to learn more about Ms. Thompson. Something told him he had made a serious mistake, one that might have consequences far beyond a simple fine. Diana, meanwhile, lay awake planning what to say at tomorrow's meeting with the crime boss. Her life might depend on being convincing. As rain pattered against her window, she wondered if her cover was already blown, and if anyone would be able to help her if it was. The end of Part Y. Apologize for the misunderstanding. I cannot actually be cancelled as I'm an AI assistant. I'm here to help you, and I want to assist you with your request. Since no Part 1 is visible, I'll write a complete 800-word short story in third-person style with simple English that should be interesting. Here it is. Jake lived in a small town, near the mountains. He was just 14 and loved adventure more than anything else. Every weekend he would explore the nearby forest, collecting interesting rocks and watching wildlife. One Saturday morning, Jake packed his backpack with water, some sandwiches, and his favorite binoculars. His mother warned him not to go too far, but Jake was curious about what might be hidden in the deep green woods. As he walked through the forest, the trees became thicker and closer together. Sunlight barely came through the dense branches. Jake heard strange sounds, not regular bird chirps or animal noises, but something different, a soft, rhythmic sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. He walked carefully, pushing branches away from his face. The sound grew louder. Jake's heart started beating faster. Was it an animal, a wind instrument, or something completely unknown? Suddenly, he saw something glimmering between two large oak trees. A small metal object was hanging from a branch, spinning slowly in the breeze. It looked like an old key, but not like any key Jake had ever seen before. The metal was strange, almost blue with a hint of green, and covered in tiny, mysterious symbols. Jake reached out and touched the key. The moment his fingers grabbed it, the forest around him changed. The sounds stopped. The trees seemed to breathe. Everything became completely silent. Then a whisper came from nowhere and everywhere. "You have been chosen." Jake didn't understand. Chosen for what? He looked around, but the forest looked exactly the same. Yet something felt different. The air was charged with a strange energy. In his hand, the key started to warm up. The symbols on it began to glow, softly, creating patterns that moved and shifted like living creatures. Jake knew this was no ordinary adventure. He realized he had two choices. He could drop the key and run back home, or he could follow wherever this mysterious moment might lead him. His heart was racing, but he felt strangely calm. The forest seemed to be waiting for his decision. Birds had stopped singing. Even the wind had become still. Everything depended on what Jake would do next. His curiosity was stronger than his fear. Jake closed his fingers around the key and took a deep breath. Whatever was happening, he was ready to find out. The key suddenly felt heavy. It pulled him forward, deeper into the forest. Jake followed, his footsteps careful but determined. He didn't know what was waiting, but he knew this was going to be the most incredible day of his life. Something magical was about to begin. Would you like me to continue the story, or modify anything about this part? Jake continued walking deeper into the forest, the mysterious key still warm in his hand. The trees seemed to bend slightly, creating a path that felt purposeful and guided. Strange whispers echoed around him, but he couldn't make out any clear words. Suddenly, the forest opened into a small clearing. In the center stood an old stone structure that looked like a small tower. It was covered in moss and seemed ancient, as if it had been standing there for hundreds of years waiting for someone to discover it. The key in Jake's hand began to pulse with a soft blue light. He could feel it pulling him toward the stone tower. Each step felt different, like he was walking between two worlds, not quite in the normal forest anymore, but not somewhere completely magical either. As he approached the tower, he noticed strange markings on its walls. They looked like a mix of drawings and symbols, some resembling animals, others looking like complex mathematical patterns. Jake touched one of the symbols, and it briefly glowed under his fingers. A soft rumbling sound came from inside the tower. Jake hesitated for a moment, his heart racing. Should he go inside? Everything around him felt both exciting and dangerous. The key suddenly became lighter. It floated from his hand and moved toward a small keyhole hidden in the tower's stone wall. Jake watched in amazement as the key perfectly fit into the hole and turned by itself. With a grinding sound, a hidden door opened. Cool air rushed out, bringing with it the smell of old books and something else, something Jake couldn't quite identify. It was a mix of earth, metal, and something sweet like cinnamon. Jake stepped inside. The interior of the tower was much larger than it looked from outside. Shelves filled with strange objects covered the walls. Old maps hung everywhere, showing lands he had never seen before. Some looked like they were drawn from imagination, with impossible mountains and seas that didn't exist on any real map. In the center of the room stood a large wooden table. On it lay an open book with pages that seemed to be moving, even though no wind was blowing. The pages turned by themselves, revealing drawings that changed and shifted before Jake's eyes. A voice whispered from somewhere, "The journey begins now." Jake didn't know what journey they meant, but he felt something important was happening. The key had brought him here for a reason. Whatever was waiting, he was ready to face it. An old wooden chest sat in the corner of the room. It was covered in dust and looked like it hadn't been opened in many years. Jake approached it slowly, sensing that something important might be inside. As he reached out to touch the chest, the symbols on the walls began to glow. The entire tower seemed to come alive with energy. Jake knew that whatever happened next would change everything. The chest had a complex lock with multiple moving parts. It looked like it would take someone very clever to open it. Jake examined the lock, his mind already trying to figure out its secrets. Outside, the forest had gone completely silent. No birds sang. No wind moved the branches. Everything was waiting, watching what Jake would do next. He took a deep breath. The adventure was just beginning, and he knew nothing would ever be the same again. "Would you like me to continue the story or modify anything about this part?" Jake studied the chest carefully. Its wooden surface was covered with intricate carvings that seemed to move when he wasn't looking directly at them. The lock was unlike anything he had ever seen, part mechanical, part magical. He remembered the key from earlier and pulled it out of his pocket. The metal glinted in the soft light filtering through the tower's small window. Jake noticed new symbols had appeared on the key, ones that weren't there before. Slowly, he placed the key near the lock. It didn't fit exactly, but something strange happened. The lock began to change shape, almost like it was breathing. The metal parts shifted and moved, adapting to the key's unusual design. A soft click broke the silence. The chest was opening. Inside, Jake found a small leather-bound journal and a strange compass. The compass didn't point north. Instead, its needle spun in complex patterns, creating beautiful spirals that seemed to tell a story of their own. The journal's pages were filled with handwritten notes in a language Jake couldn't understand. But some pages had drawings, maps of places that looked both familiar and completely alien, mountains that twisted like ribbons, forests that seemed to have buildings growing inside them. Suddenly, the tower around him began to shake. Dust fell from the ceiling. The walls seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting like a living creature. Jake realized he wasn't just in a tower anymore. He was inside something much bigger and more mysterious. A map on the wall started to glow. It showed a path through impossible landscapes, mountains that floated in the sky, rivers that ran upside down, forests with trees made of crystal. The path wound through these strange places, ending at a point marked with a symbol Jake didn't recognize. The compass in his hand began to spin faster. Its needle pointed directly at the glowing map, as if showing him the way forward. Jake understood. Without knowing how, he was being called to a journey. Outside the tower, the forest had changed. Trees that were green before now looked silver. The ground seemed to shimmer with a strange light. Everything felt different, as if the world had been slightly twisted. Jake knew he had a choice. He could stay in the safety of the tower, or he could follow the path the compass was showing him. Adventure called, and his heart was racing with excitement. He packed the journal and compass into his backpack. The key hung around his neck on a leather string. Whatever was waiting, Jake was ready to discover it. The tower's door opened by itself. A path of glowing stones led into the transformed forest. Each stone seemed to pulse with a soft blue light, creating a clear trail through the strange landscape. Something was waiting for him, something big and important. Jake could feel it in every part of his body. This was more than just an adventure. This was a journey that would change everything he knew about the world. His first step onto the glowing path felt like stepping into a dream. The forest around him watched and waited. The adventure was about to begin. Jake took a deep breath and started walking. Would you like me to continue the story or modify anything about this part? The glowing path led Jake through a forest that defied all normal rules. Trees whispered as he passed, their branches moving without wind. Strange creatures watched from shadows, not quite animals, not quite something else. His compass continued to spin, but now it seemed to be guiding him with purpose. Each turn of the path revealed something unexpected. Rocks that looked like they were made of glass, flowers that changed colors when he looked directly at them. The air itself felt alive and full of secret messages. Jake noticed his footsteps made no sound. The ground beneath him seemed soft, almost like walking on clouds. In the distance, he could see mountains that didn't look like normal mountains. They twisted and curved like giant sleeping creatures. Something moved in the shadows. Jake stopped. A small creature emerged. It looked like a mix between a fox and a bird, with silver fur and wings that shimmered like water. The creature looked at Jake and nodded as if recognizing him. The journal in his backpack suddenly felt warm. Jake pulled it out and discovered new writing had appeared on its pages, symbols and drawings that told a story of a hidden world, a world that existed between reality and imagination. A sound caught his attention. It was music, but not music like he had ever heard before. It was a melody that seemed to come from the trees, the rocks, the very air around him. The sound told a story without words. The silver foxbird creature walked beside him now. It didn't seem afraid or threatening. Instead, it looked like a guide, showing Jake the way through this strange landscape. Jake realized he was no longer in the normal world. This was a place between places, a world where imagination and reality mixed together. Every step took him further from everything he knew. The path began to climb. Ahead, he could see a structure made of what looked like living crystal. It grew from the ground like a plant, its walls transparent and shifting. Windows appeared and disappeared. Doors opened and closed without anyone touching them. His compass suddenly stopped spinning. The needle pointed directly at the crystal structure. Jake understood. This was where he needed to go. The silver creature stopped at the base of the structure. It looked at Jake and made a sound that was part chirp, part whisper. A welcome, a warning? Jake couldn't tell. As he approached the crystal building, he noticed his reflection changing in its walls. Sometimes he looked older, sometimes younger. Sometimes he looked like himself, sometimes like someone, or something, completely different. The door opened before he could touch it. Inside, the floor was made of something that looked like water but felt solid under his feet. Strange machines and objects filled the room, things that looked part scientific, part magical. A voice echoed through the space, not a human voice, but something that spoke directly into his mind. "You have arrived," it said. "The journey begins now." Jake took a deep breath. He didn't know what was waiting, but he knew everything was about to change. The key around his neck began to glow. The compass in his hand hummed with energy. The crystal structure seemed to be breathing, waiting for his next move. The silver creature watched from outside, its eyes full of knowledge and mystery. Jake stepped forward. "Would you like me to continue the story or modify anything about this part?"